Hey there, Dave Prouse here. Let's install Debian. I'm going to install it as a client operating system, meaning we will be installing it with a desktop environment. So you might have seen a previous install where I did it as a server with no desktop environment and text only. Here we'll be doing it as a client that you can use on a workstation, on a laptop, PC, and so on. So the first thing you need to do is download Debian, and I'm here at debian.org/distrib. And so that's where you go to download stuff, and you can download in any format you could possibly think of. I'm just going to go to download an installation image, and then I'm going to select AMD 64 as my platform, and that's going to grab the image file as an ISO image for that platform. So if you have an AMD PC or an Intel PC, that's the one you're going to want. Most laptops, that's what you want. But you have plenty of other options here, and there's plenty of other options for how to get the software. You can get it in a variety of ways from here, so whatever you need. So I'm going to select that. Actually, I already have. I've downloaded the ISO image, and I've downloaded version 10.6, and that's what you can see at the bottom of the screen there. And so once you've downloaded it, you can create yourself a virtual machine and start up that virtual machine. Make sure that it's pointed to the ISO image. And I've created a virtual machine already within KVM. I have videos on VirtualBox and KVM separately on my website, so check those out if you want. This video is not about virtualization. It's just about the install of Debian itself. So I'm going to finish up the creation of that guy. It's going to create the virtual machine and boot automatically to Debian. There we go. So we have options here. We could do a graphical install, which means you can use the mouse, or you can do a standard install with just the keyboard. You have some advanced options and so on. Let's do the graphical install. We'll press enter for that, and that'll boot it up and start up the install. And we could use the mouse, or we could just use the keyboard if we want. It's really whatever you want to do. And here we go. Start up the installation process. So I'm going to select English as my language because that is what I use, and click continue. I am in the United States. It found me. But you would choose whatever country you're in and continue. And for my keyboard usage, I'm going to be using American English. So again, depending on your country and your language, select the keyboard that you need and continue. All right, that's going to load some additional components. And it says from the CD. Now you can actually get a disk if you need one from Debian. But this is actually coming from the ISO image. It's detecting network hardware. In this case, it's all virtual hardware because I'm loading this into a virtual machine. And then it'll attempt a network configuration and configuring with DHCP by default. And it actually worked because I do have a DHCP server running on this virtualization platform. Okay. Next, we need to enter a host name for the system. It says Debian by default. We could call it that, or I could call it Deb Client, or whatever you want. So pick a name. I'll say Deb Client and continue. And the domain name, we can select one. You could use example.com if you want to use a test domain, or just leave it blank. And you can always add a domain name later to the host name. And click continue. Set up users and passwords. Okay, first we need the root password. Now in some systems you don't set up root. It's there, but you don't set it up during the installation. Here in Debian we do. So I'm going to type a root password. That's the master administrative account. And then retype it. Make sure that you're using something complex because this account has full access to everything. It is root. And we'll click continue. And then we can set up a user account. So this could be whatever you want. It could be, something like this or whatever. I'm just going to choose the name user for my test system. So we'll just call it user and continue. And what's the username going to be? Well, the actual username would be what's associated with the computer, not just your name, but your username. So in that case, I might use something like this on the job. But I'm just going to leave it as user, so it's easy to work with and easy to remember. And continue. And then we need a password for the user account. I'm putting in a different yet complex password for the user account and continue. All right, that'll do a couple configurations here. It's trying to get time from a network time server. It does, and then it says select your time zone. Well, I am Eastern in the United States, and so that has already been selected for me. We'll click continue. Now it's going to detect any, well, disks, quote unquote, and start up the partitioner. Well, here you can do a lot of different things, and I'm not going to get into partitions here, but quite often if you're doing an installation, it's a good idea to have the home directory in a separate partition. But I'm not going to do that here. I'm just going to do guided use entire disk and just let it set it up as one big partition for us. But again, normally you'd want to do it as manual and really select what you need. And this helps for efficiency and also for troubleshooting later on. But for now, for this virtual machine, for testing purposes, just guided use entire disk and continue. So it sees the virtual drive as VDA. I made it 16 gig. Okay, that's fine. Continue. And select for partitioning. Okay. We're going to do all files in one partition, but again, a separate home partition is usually a good idea, and you could even separate all three of these. But I'm going to do all files in one partition just for this install. And if it's the first time you're installing Debian, that's fine for new users. Okay, and we'll continue. Now it gives us the information here. Here's our primary partition, 14 gig. And that's an ext4 partition. That's where all of our data is going to go. And then we have a swap partition, which is normally a percentage of your RAM. And actually, this is 100% of RAM by default if you're using 2 gigs of RAM, which I am. So that's a logical partition for swap files between drive and RAM. Okay, so that's fine. We're going to finish partitioning, write the changes to disk, continue. Okay, and now it warns you one more time. Here's what's going to happen. This virtual drive is going to get these partitions. Are you sure you want to do it? Because everything's going to get written over. But this is a brand new virtual machine, so I'm not worried about that. I'm going to say yes and continue. All right, it's going to install the base system here. Now, another thing is you got to keep in mind, you want to make sure you're meeting the minimum requirements for Debian. So make sure your virtual machine or your physical system meets the minimum requirements for Debian. And that's going to be different depending on whether you install a server or a client with a desktop environment. Because a desktop environment is going to take a lot more resources. So make sure your RAM, CPU, and drive space are up to specs. And quite often I'll double those specs if at all possible. Okay, so it installed the base system and it says your installation disk has been scanned. Its label is this, 10.6. Now, when you install Debian, version 10 is, code name is Buster. And we're on 10.6 currently as of the recording of this video. That is the latest stable version that you can install, standard install. Okay, so that's basically the install. If you have another drive, or excuse me, if you have another disk, you would insert it now. We don't, so we're going to leave it as no and click continue. All right, now we need to configure the package manager and do some more downloads of information and packages and programs and a little more configuration. So it says, find the mirror that's closest to you, and you're going to want to select the country that you're in. For me, United States, and click continue. And then select the best mirror. Well, there's a bunch around me, but usually I just select deb.debian.org. If that fails for some reason, I would select something else near me like this. They've got some good servers there at that university. But I'm going to leave it as deb.debian.org and click continue. If you have a proxy that you need to connect to get out to the internet, you have to use this naming convention, and you would put it here. I am not using one, so I'm going to bypass that and click continue. All right, that's going to configure APT, which is the package manager for Debian. You use it whenever you install or remove standard programs in Debian. And now it's going to go ahead to the select and install software section, where we do have to select what it is we want to use with this Debian client. Now, there's a couple of different desktop environments that you can use. Usually I work with the GNOME desktop environment, but there's others. There's KDE, there's others, and you might choose to use those. Anyways, we just got to the PopCon, the popularity contest. Some of us call it the popcorn contest. No. I'm going to say no for this. We don't want to participate in the survey for this because this is just a virtual machine. It's really of no consequence, and it could really skew results, to be honest with you. So I'm going to say no to that and continue. But if you were to install this on a laptop, you could participate in that, and it would really help the folks at Debian. All right, so at the moment, only the core of the system is installed. Now, if we were installing a server, we would do this with no desktop environment. So we would deselect this. Very important. But this one we're doing as a client, just a regular old client computer. So we can leave Debian desktop environment checkmarked. And that actually uses GNOME effectively. But you could also checkmark GNOME to have separate files installed. And XFCE, which is lightweight. KDE Plasma, which is super cool. And you could switch back and forth between these, right? For now, I'm just going to leave it as Debian desktop environment, the standard. We also have the option to turn this into a web server. It can automatically install a web server, a print server, so you can use this to, multiple computers can use it to go through to a printer, and SSH. Now, if you're going to connect to this client to control it remotely from the command line, and you would be if you're doing any of my courses or webinars, then you should install SSH server. And so that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to leave Debian desktop environment, the standard for Debian client. I'm going to leave that checkmarked. I'm going to deselect print server, select SSH server, and leave the standard system utilities checkmarked, and click continue. That's going to go ahead and install software. It's got to retrieve over 1,000 files from the internet to complete the install. And then it's going to go ahead and install all of those. So I'm going to step away and pause the recording of this video, and I'll be back when the install is finished, or at least when we get to the next step. Okay, so all those files installed. Took several minutes, and it could take longer or less time depending on how much power your virtual machine has been given in the form of resources. But now it brings us to the Grub bootloader section. And it says, it seems that this new installation is the only operating system on this computer. If so, it should be safe to install the Grub bootloader to the master boot record of the drive. Now, here's the thing. You may or may not want to do that if you have another operating system on the drive. If you're trying to do a dual boot, then you might have to take some additional precautions. But here, yes, we do want the Grub bootloader. It's just a brand new virtual machine. So we're going to say yes to this and click continue. And then it says you need to make the newly installed system bootable. You've got to select the partition if it finds it for you. If not, you'd have to enter that device manually. But this is it, /dev/VDA, and click continue. That's going to install the Grub bootloader. And finish up the installation. There we go. Installation is complete. Time to boot into the new system. And it tells you make sure to remove the installation media. So if you had some type of disk or anything like that, you want to remove it before starting the installation over, or excuse me, restarting. Click continue here. All right. That's going to reboot my virtual machine. And by the way, I'm doing this in KVM. And you have options. You can do just boot to Debian or advanced options for Debian. So we're just going to boot into Debian and press enter. And that's going to boot that up now, first time. Looking for green OKs here. I think everything was green. We could always check the logs, but I believe it looked good. And boom, we're in. That was pretty quick. And that's one of the things about the Debian 10 client. It is pretty quick. This particular virtual machine has 2 gigs of memory. And I use 2 logical CPUs, so 2 threads for this. The bare minimum to run this is 512 megabytes of RAM. But it is recommended that you run with 2 gigabytes of RAM. And quite often, if I'm showing a client, I'll set it up as 4 gig or 8 gig. Okay. And you want to make sure that your system has a 1 gigahertz CPU and quite often 2 logical CPUs. It's a good way to go virtually, maybe even 4. All right, so that's the specs there. But anyway, here I am ready to log in. So that's the installation. Install is finished. We're done. But I'm going to show a couple configurations real quick for you. So I'm going to press enter. Well, let's click on user here and type in the password, whatever that was for user. Okay, and log in to Debian Linux. Yes. And that's it. Once you're logged in, you see whatever backdrop they feel like giving you for that particular version. If we press the super key, and if you have a PC keyboard, that would be the Windows key. But if we press the super key, we'll see our possible applications here on the side. We can do more applications over here. You have workspaces that you can work with. And if you want to get to your settings, you can go here at the arrow and click on settings. Or when you press the super key, you can search. So if you wanted to go to settings, just type in settings and it finds it. And tweaks also. GNOME tweaks is great. Or if you want to open up the terminal for the command line, you could do that as well. Right? So lots of options here. Let's actually go to settings. And let's do a couple modifications. I'm going to change the resolution on this system. I'm going to add a shortcut for the terminal, keyboard shortcut. And I would like to work with the IP address. Okay, so actually, first thing I'm going to do is go to power. I'm going to get rid of the blank screen, because if the blank screen comes up after 5 minutes, we have to log back on, which is somewhat annoying if you're doing this in a virtual machine and you're testing. So I'm going to set that to never. Automatic suspend, I'm going to turn off. Because again, it's a virtual machine. Don't really need that for our testing and educational purposes. So turn those off so it's just a little bit easier for us and we don't have to log on quite as much. The next thing is I want to work with the video. And if we go to devices and then go to displays, you'll see we can change the resolution here. Now you can also get to this directly by right-clicking on the desktop and going to display settings. Same place. I'm running at 1080p, so I'm going to change my resolution to 1080p, 1920 by 1080. And I'm going to scale it. I'm going to put it to 200%. I usually do this in GNOME for training purposes, so people like you can see what I'm doing better. But if I'm just working on a system for tech work, I would just leave it as 100% and try to squash as much as I can onto the screen. So I just set it to 1080p and 200% scaling, so everything's bigger. Click apply, and we'll say yes, we're going to keep the changes. So everything's nice and big here. You can see everything. It looks much better at the resolution, and it's much bigger. All right, let's go back to the main settings screen, and we're going to go to devices and keyboard. And this is where we can go to add shortcuts. There's lots of shortcuts already built into Linux. But I'm going to go down to the bottom and click the plus sign to add my own little shortcut. I'm going to call this terminal. And I like the old school idea of opening a terminal with Control-Alt-T. So I want to add that to Debian because it's not there by default like it is in some other Linux distros. And they do that for a reason. If you're used to Control-Alt-T, they do that for a reason. Several programs will conflict with it, with their shortcuts. For example, PyCharm. But anyways, we need to name the command. What command opens the terminal? It's called gnome-terminal, if you're in the GNOME desktop, that is. I am, so that's what I'm going to type in, and I'm going to set a shortcut for that, and just click, or just type what I want, which is Control-Alt-T. That's it. Add it on, and it adds that to the bottom as a another one. Sometimes I'll do that with files too. I'll do Control-Alt-N for files, which is, what is it, Nautilus. But anyways, now we have that shortcut. If I press Control-Alt-T, that brings up the terminal automatically for me. Okay, and this is in extremely light mode, which can be quite blaring. I am more of a fan of dark mode, especially of late. So I'm going to go to Edit, Preferences, and here's my profile. Go to Colors, and I'm going to deselect Use Colors from System Theme, which actually works because you can change the system theme altogether, and that'll change your terminal as well. So you could do it that way if you wanted to, but I'm going to deselect this and have it set as Tango Dark. And one thing that I didn't realize was that at 200%, I can't scroll down. So that's a little bit of a problem. Let's change it back to 100%. Jump back here. There we go. Have that says Tango Dark. Close it. Now we're good. Change this back to 200%. Apply it. Keep changes. Blah, blah, blah. There we go. Now we have the nice Tango Dark, which I just like so much better. All right, so that is the terminal. And so we can go ahead and take a look at the IP address. We could do an nmcli, and we'll see the IP address that we have here. And again, that command is nmcli, Network Manager Command Line Interface. I want to do everything in the terminal here. You could do this stuff in settings too, but I want to do it in the terminal. So here's the IP address that's been assigned to me, 10.0.2.185. Now, let's say I wanted to change that. I could do that in a variety of ways. I could change that with the nmcli command. I could change it in settings and go over here to our wired settings. Go to the gear icon and change IP version 4 from automatic to manual and specify what the address is. For example, 10.0.2.52, which is one of the addresses I do use statically for Debian client in webinars and courses. If we did that, we'd have to set the net mask, which on this network is that, and the gateway, and the DNS server IP, and so on, and then apply it. And then you'd have a static address. You could do this with the nmcli command as well. I'm going to cancel out of here. We could do an nmcli con mod, the name of the connection, which is this in Network Manager, and then specify the address. For example, this, and a /24 instead of a 222.55.0. So, and there's more. You can do the gateway address, the DNS server, and so on. And I show how to do that in other videos on my website. But lots of options to change the address. I'm actually going to leave this as DHCP for now because that's normally what a client would have. It would have a DHCP address, and that's fine. But if you wanted to change it to static so that you know what it is and you are manually putting it in and in complete control of it, now you know how. Okay, well, I'll just show the rest that I would normally do. We got the version 4 address. We do IP version 4.gateway and specify what that is. IP version 4.dns and specify what that is. And then I would set IP version 4 method. If I could type method, I would set that to manual. That's the same as a static IP address, a manually configured IP address. And then you would down the adapter and bring it back up and you'd be all good. But again, like I say, you could do it in settings or in a variety of other ways in Network Manager. Okay, so that's it. Now, the last thing is we did get this IP from the DHCP server. We should be set. We do have a DNS address. It doesn't show our gateway here, but if we do an IP route, we'll see our default gateway, which is this. We should be fine for connecting to the internet, but you should always check. You could do that with Firefox, or you could just do it in the terminal with a ping command like this. And we're getting replies from example.com, so that is good. Control C to break out. And that's about it. That's enough for the configurations. That's the install Debian client. We're just using the standard Debian desktop, which is effectively GNOME. So we're doing everything in GNOME here. And I'll leave you with one last thing. If you want to tweak the system a little bit, a built-in program is GNOME-tweaks. Press enter for that, and you'll see the GNOME-tweaks option. You can change the appearance, change the look from light to dark on everything, like this. Yes. Change the cursors, icons, the shell you're using, font size, or you could just change the scaling factor. I had changed it from 100 to 200%, but maybe you want a little bit more configurability for that, and you can do that here. We could change it to, say, 1.25 and make everything even bigger, or 0.75 and make it smaller. And I would just use that, though. I would not modify the scale from 100 to 200%. I would normally just use this. We'll leave that as 1, though. Okay, and lots of other stuff you can configure here in GNOME tweaks. So that's a nice little tool for you. So that's the last piece of info. That's the end of this video. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you at the next one.